Well, firstly, thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Lucy, for inviting me here to speak tonight. So, I am Nathanial Legall, Records Officer at Somerset Mammal Group, and I will be talking about the wonderful world of Waterways. First of all, just a basic introduction to Somerset Mammal Group. We are primarily here to encourage and promote awareness and conservation and recording of mammals in Somerset. We encourage and support their recording through surveys throughout the county, as well as training members of the public in how to record them. So last year we held talks on Britain's big cats and them roaming the countryside, as well as rabbit and brown hare ecology and pathology. And we also support a range of mammal surveys across the county, basically in our recording area, which is actually between South Bristol and South Somerset. In the next coming weeks, we also have a talk and tour of Secret World planned, and also a dormouse box building workshop in the plans. If you want to hear a bit more about that, then check out Facebook for more details, with dates coming out soon. So in terms of myself, I'm a professional ecologist with a mixed background in the public and private sectors. Volunteering as a waterfowl monitor is actually one of my first steps into ecology back home in London, where I was exploring their presence in the Lee Valley using meat rafts. So it's interesting to kind of come full circle, be able to talk to you about them tonight. I'll promise to slow down and I'll speak quite quickly. So waterfowl share the same wonderful world we live in. A world that is semi-natural in nature, heavily modified, obviously to suit the needs of a dominant species. Formerly common along the banks of rivers, streams, ditches or rings in this part of the country. Lakes and ponds. The waterfowl is one of Britain's fastest declining mammals, with a startling 95% decline over the last 100 years in terms of their distribution. So what are the main reasons for this crazy decline? In nearly all the cases, it's a result of one of three factors, either alone or in combination. So first of all, it's habitat loss. The second one being population fragmentation through habitat degradation, and predation by invasive American mink. So the waterfowl itself is one of Britain's largest voles. So adults typically weigh in between 100 and 350 grams. So for comparison's sake, a full vole typically weighs in around 40 grams at its top end. Waterfowls have a very rounded body, blunt muzzle. Unfortunately, I couldn't bring one here tonight to show you. Also, very short, round ears that are mostly covered by the fur on their head. So, in fact, the character Ratty from Wind and Willows is usually referenced when it comes to waterfowls, because that character was based around waterfowls instead of rats. So waterfowls are herbivorous, primarily feeding on the stems and leaves of waterside plants, including stands of willow herb, meadowsweet, rushes, sedges, and reeds. But over winter, they'll switch, and they'll focus on the roots and bark of woody species like willow. So at some sites, waterfowls are known to actually climb into some of our shrub species and feed off the branches of species like hawthorn, alder and willows as well.
Climb up in the trees?
Yeah, actually climb into shrubs.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's a lesser known fact. So not entirely aquatic. Waterfowls prefer sites with wide boundaries of riparian vegetation growing from the banks and obviously looking out onto open water. And this serves as both their food and their shelter, their larder and their protection. Their habitat preferences have been studied in a lot of detail since the 90s. But at this point, and from personal experience, they're pretty much habitat generalists, and they can be found in a broad range of habitats. Waterfowl prefer easily penetrable earth or salty banks into which they can burrow, slow flowing watercourses with relatively deep water, ideally about a metre deep, and probably one of the best places to see waterfowls and their signs is at Sturt. So waterfowl is a rodent. So along with other voles in the UK, it is also taxonomically close to lemmings and muskrats. Phylogenetic work from the mid-noughties by Xavier Lambdin suggests that the British distribution of waterfowls stems from two separate colonisation events following the last ice age 10,000 years ago. So one colonisation event resulted in the waterfowls we have here in England and Wales, and there was a second one which colonised Scotland, and this is known as the Celtic fringe hypothesis. So this has actually resulted in waterfowls in Scotland which, whilst belonging to the same species, are actually mostly black in colour, whereas the ones we have down south are much more brown compared to their northern cousins. So waterfowls have a relatively long breeding season compared to other mammals. It starts in March into September. In small, isolated populations, waterfowls form monogamous pairs, whilst in large populations, both sexes are regularly intermingling and promiscuous, with many litters produced by 2 or 3 males. So there are usually 6 young per litter, born in a nest inside their burrows, and females are known to disperse up to 2 kilometres from their natal nests after a few weeks. At the moment, the maximum viable population is unknown, but it's predicted that 2 kilometres of good quality waterway habitat can support between 30 and 50 waterfowls at the beginning of the breeding season. So as I mentioned before, waterfowls can exist in suboptimal habitats where neighbouring populations are present. So for example, in upland populations in Scotland, where each population is unlikely to exist on its own, the population as a whole is stable because the distance between subpopulations is small enough to allow dispersal and the constant recolonisation of empty habitats. So the overall large populations of waterfowl that we have here in the UK exist in what's known as a metapopulation. So waterfowl are frequently confused with brown rats, which also inhabit riparian habitats and are, contrary to popular belief, very good swimmers. However, brown rats tend to have a pointed muzzle, much more obvious ears, and sparsely furred tail that almost appears sort of scaly in appearance, almost naked without any fur. So when seen in the water, rats are much less buoyant, so they actually swim a lot lower than waterfowls tend to swim. So as with many mammals, direct observation of waterfowls is not always possible or not always the best use of time. Thankfully, they have a few distinctive field signs that we can rely on as ways of surveying for their presence or absence. So waterfowls often select a favoured feeding spot along watercourses or where they'll haul out of the water, and these are known as latrines or feeding stations. And these will often have a nest, a sort of a neat pile of cut vegetation with sections between 5 and 10 centimetres long. and these cups will have a 45-degree end to them. Very distinctive, neat little pile. Very tidy. Water voles also take lengths of vegetation into their burrow and then rip them apart. And they might nip at them into pieces and store them at the entrance of their burrow. So another field sign would be the burrows themselves. So I'll argue that the burrows are probably the easiest field sign to rely on when it comes to surveying for water voles. So their burrows can be seen easily by walking along the bank of one side of a river and then looking across to the other side, ideally during autumn or winter when obviously the vegetation has died back. So water vole burrow entrances are typically wider than they are high, and appear as a series of holes along the water's edge, some of which are just at the water's level or might even be below the water level. So when we compare this to rat burrows, they tend to be very well trodden and have a heap of spoil leading to the entrance, whereas with water voles it's just a sort of steep drop off. And then also the third field sign we can discuss this evening would be their tic-tac shaped droppings, and the colour of these droppings tends to vary between dark brown and purple and green, but very distinctive, very diagnostic for water voles and their presence. I haven't tried this myself, but apparently they have a putty-like texture to them and are odourless. But let me know. So, back in London, I actually used mink rafts, which are basically little floating platforms onto which you can place a clay pad in the middle. And what that allows is for mink and water voles to basically come along as they're walking along the water's edge, and their footprints then get left on that clay pad, and that's the sign you look for when it comes to surveying water voles. So the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust have a fantastic schematic on how to build them. I found them to be very successful, and they also collect some of the other field signs that I talked about before, those latrines, those droppings. They'll often use them as platforms as well. So water voles leave distinctive star-shaped footprints when they use those clay pad inserts. And these footprints can also be seen within areas of the riverbank. But I find this isn't as reliable. Tracks can degrade in condition. They're very quick to disappear with the ebb and flow of the river itself. And the tracks also depend on the right weather. You know, if it rains straight afterwards, they're gonna get washed away. So whilst prints are diagnostic for water vole, it can be difficult to distinguish between water vole prints and those from brown rat, for example, without a lot of field experience. So if you're planning to look for water voles, obviously I would encourage the importance of working their water safety practices and avoiding lone working. And obviously finding any of these signs were fantastic. It definitely warrants further investigation and with a proper full survey to fully investigate the surrounding upstream and downstream habitats. So I did produce a little map to show the sort of 2-kilometre presence of water voles between Wellington and Taunton. At the moment, my data is a bit patchy, but talking to Rob, we might have a load of extra records which we can potentially use to explore how they use the landscape and how we can potentially join them up a bit more. So as discussed earlier, there are various reasons for the decline of water vole. So what can we do to help them? I'm sure James will go into a bit more detail in a moment about the river tone and protecting water voles at a more local context. But as mentioned at the top of the talk, water voles are vulnerable to habitat changes and potentially by American mink. But evidence from the River Otter trial showed that beaver engineered wetlands and areas that they create have actually benefited water vole populations by creating extra new habitats, which then provide refuge from predation. So their interspecies relationship definitely warrants further investigation, and potentially might even be a nature recovery option. So potentially making space for beavers might actually help water voles as well. We can also get out and about and look for water voles, record their presence, and then share that information with the Somerset Environmental Record Centre. Or you can also use Mammal Society's Mammal Mapper app. So that's it from me. Thank you for your time. I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Nathan.
Be gentle.
Be very gentle. Helen, do you have a question?
I have a question. So we've got some water voles, luckily, in Wellington, and they're using the leats that used to lead to the Fox's factory, which is behind this building.
Yep.
And the problem is the leats are getting really full of silt. And they're going to need dredging at some point. It was really nice to hear that they eat different things in the winter and the summer, and they might actually go up into the shrubs. Is there any particular time of year that's better to do maintenance on the leats? Anything that we can do to help not disturb the water voles while doing maintenance?
That is an ecological consultancy mitigation question, really.
Right.
So you understand water voles are protected under the Wildlife Conservation Act 1981, fully protected. So their habitats, their breeding activities, the individuals themselves are all protected from harm, from damage, from handling. So when it comes to managing the habitats they're in, it's a bit of a catch-22, because I imagine by desilting you're creating extra habitat, because you're going to open up.
Yeah, because otherwise it's going to
waterway.
silt up and not be a leat anymore.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a weird one where you might need to seek advice from a qualified consultant on this. But as an overall headline, you should be able to do the work you want to do, but just with a bit of mitigation, potentially moving the water voles away temporarily to bring them back to that area to avoid that harm to the individuals, but carrying out those works in a measured way which will protect that habitat as well.
Yeah. Would it be worth planting some willow or something like that?
Yeah, you'd expect to be able to create that extra habitat as well in the short term. So there's no short term loss, but again, it's a bit of a weird one, bit of a risky one. So yeah, definitely recommend some professional advice on that one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is that something that the Somerset Mammal Group can advise on, or who would we go to?
We could definitely put you in touch with the suitably qualified ecologists on that. Yeah, absolutely.
So if we see evidence of water voles, who should we tell?
Could you please tell the Somerset Environmental Record Centre in the first instance? That'd be fantastic. That way we have those records for the future, and it allows us to preserve them better. So what that effectively does is it puts out a bit of a beacon to the ecological community, and it lets other groups like the Mammal Group and yourselves know that they exist in the landscape.
Nathan, yeah. Can you record it on iNaturalist on the app?
Yeah, iNaturalist works in the same way.
And that will go through to the Somerset Records.
That eventually ends up at Cirque as well.
Right.
Yeah, so I record.
Is this Somerset Records easy to find, or?
Somerset Environmental Records. So they actually share the office with Somerset Wildlife Trust on Wellington Road in Taunton. So 34 Wellington Road, don't forget the address.
The website is really, really easy to use. Like, you just type in SERC, SERC, and it literally is so simple. If anybody wants to do that with anything, they'll accept any, like, if you see kingfisher or, like they haven't got any records, they love it. So yeah, just go on there. You don't have to have a grid reference. If you don't have it, just like a general area or something. Yeah, really happy.
So grid reference is nice.
Professor Google and
Yeah, it's SERC, CAP, done. Yeah. What have you, have you sure you've seen it? No, I think there's a
Fantastic.
Good advice. Thank you.
Thank you. Trifina?
I just wanted to ask about the habitat in terms of flashy streams, because as you go upstream from here, there are deeper sections you mentioned about in Egypt, but they tend to be pools.
Yes.
Are they, and they're very flashy, so is that vole land or not?
From my experience, water voles tend to prefer more settled waters. So, as I mentioned before, they prefer slow flowing water, but I think that you probably prefer going on to the slower end of that scale rather than to the top, just because I imagine it makes it easier to get into the burrows from the water. So I've seen water voles in habitat where the water is dead still, but rarely have I seen them in sort of flashier, faster flow waters and larger rivers. So that's just the person.
What I meant by flashy is that they go up and down really, really quickly with
Right.
rain.
Yes. So in terms of dynamic rivers, flashier rivers, they actually benefit from those kind of habitats. So those definitely still warrant looking. Water voles will build their burrows, and what they do is they build a little U-bend, a bit like what we have in our bathrooms. And what that does is it stops predators like stoats and weasels from reaching their nest, whereas they can happily swim through that no problem every day. So obviously there's a limit to the amount of tidal flow that they'll accept, but it's not a complete constraint to their presence.
And so the other question was, you on the size, what kind of size hole are you looking for?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I brought my one prop. Unfortunately, it is empty, I'm afraid. So, what water vole handlers do is they use Pringles cans to actually handle water voles. So I think this is a good sort of size for imagining the size of a nest hole. Yeah.
Good prop. Thank you. There was one more question. Yes. Comment.
Do otters eat water voles?
They have been recorded doing it, so because they're opportunistic predators, they will eat anything, but they also reduce mink populations. So otters don't like mink, and mink on linear habitats like the Tone have become much rarer since otters have come back. And so mink eat more water voles than otters do, so overall it's good.
And we all love beavers, basically. Bottom line is more beavers, more everything.
Any questions? There's a good level of questions. Not too political, it's good.
Dogs, because our population in the basins, people are letting their dogs go in where the water voles are, which I think we should have a sign saying keep your dog out of here.
We have a very polite suggestion, and it is something that's really hard. I mean, I don't know what the solution is, because if you sort of tell people off.
Well, there is a sign in the basins itself now about keeping your dog on the lead around nature.
Yeah.
But where the voles
I don't know. If anyone has any really good suggestions about how we manage dog and wildlife interaction, and people interaction, I guess, as well, please do get in touch with us, because it's something that the Town Council and the Green Corridor Steering Committee think a lot about, and we don't really help. I mean, there's also this idea of having a traffic light system where there are places where you really shouldn't walk your dog, which are red, and then there's orange where you can if you like but keep them on a lead, and then there's green where you can let them off and it's fine.
I've got a suggestion.
Yeah.
So I'm a dog walker who goes down the basins and used to let my dog go in the water there. And I've started walking through the field that's been planted up with trees through the middle.
Yeah.
So she doesn't get to that part of the water, and she doesn't get to the river on the other side.
Right.
So she goes through the middle. She doesn't seem to mind, so that might work.
Good suggestion. Tell other people. As you're walking along. Hey, it's really nice dog walking over here, away from the water voles. Yeah. Yeah, it is tricky. It is tricky keeping everyone happy. Anyway, Nathan, thank you so much for that. It was
That's
really
good.
fascinating.